This is CXO Secrets, the podcast that takes you inside the mind of business leaders and reveals the strategies behind their success. Coming up in today's show.
But somebody might say, I'm a developer or I'm a system administrator. As Arron said, that's the identity that's important, not the peripheral. And the server or the workload, that's the key workload and your virtualist compute that's running something. It's the data that's important. And currently, a lot of security operations centers are actually looking at IP addresses and users. So great that they use a bit of identity in there, but they don't really know what the user does. So if an identity was impersonated, it's a problem.
We're starting to move away from AI being a gimmick and just something that's there as an add-on to something that is truly useful. There are functions like user entity behavior analytics, as an example, that are embedded in a lot of security platforms now, which essentially uses things like machine learning to correlate what would be normal behavior for a user. That anomaly detection massively reduces the amount of time it would normally take a SOC analyst to detect some kind of behavior. It's doing those risk ratings, it's doing that pattern detection for you, so an analyst isn't having to spend hours going through a multitude of logs and baselining different things themselves.
CXO Secrets is powered by EDS, going beyond connections. Find out about upcoming C-level events, experiences and insights at edsxevents.com. Darren Humphries, Group CISO and CTO Partner at Acora, and Arron Thundercliffe, Cyber Defense and Threat Intelligence at Google. Thank you both for joining us on CXO Secrets.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, appreciate it.
This is an exciting moment because we haven't had more than one guest at a time on the show before. So this is new territory for us. First of all, let's just find out a bit about you. Darren, where are you joining us from today and what do you do at Acora?
I'm in County Durham in England. For people who don't know, I'm near the Wall. It's a Game of Thrones reference. The Wall does exist and I live next to it. What do I do at Acora? So Acora are a full stack business. In easy terms, we are an IT service provider, security service provider, data apps and AI security provider.
Okay, very, very good. And Arron from Google. Hey, great to have Google on the show. Tell me a bit more about what you do.
Yeah, sure. So, Arron Thundercliffe. So I work in the Google Cloud Security division, which isn't just cloud, despite the name. So specialize in cyber defense, threat intelligence, and essentially I act as like a security advisor or officially a partner engineer, which aligns me to MSSPs that work with Google, like Acora. So I act as a security advisor to the C-suite, helping guide security strategy and how to make the most out of the Google security offerings, essentially. I have a wide background in security in general, networks, cyber defense, which obviously helps with the current role.
Super stuff. So the conversation that I want us to have today is around the concept of shifting left and DevSecOps. What is it? Why is it? And really how to make the most of it, because it all seems very simple when you explain integrating security into development and operations. But there are some challenges in there, but we'll come to that in a moment. Let's kick off first, though, by looking at how cybersecurity has evolved, not necessarily from the perspective of the bad actors and their attacks, but instead the sort of processes and structures that organizations have put in place to protect themselves. And Darren, with all due respect, you've been clicking around the cybersecurity industry for a good while. How do you summarize how cyber defense has changed?
It's evolved greatly. So if you take for the year 2000s, so in the early .com bubble, people used to have private networks, very little internet access. So there was none of these e-commerce applications, websites and things on the internet. So the first, delve into cybersecurity before pre-2000 were people dealing with passwords, user accounts, and things like that, and some basically border-based network routing and firewalls and security. The predominance of the security industry really didn't kick off until around about 2004-ish. So if you go on Amazon or anywhere else, you'll not find a book that was really published before then. You'll find scholarly articles and university articles and things, but no mainstream and no education that before that time. So it really started off with network perimeter operations, so NOC environment, people would call it. It was around installing firewalls. It was when people were starting to adopt the internet. I know that sounds really weird for some people, but the internet was adopted in the early 2000s.
I remember it well. I remember getting my first internet-facing email address. We had internal communication systems, but that moment when, from my desktop, I had access to the World Wide Web, it wasn't just something I did at home, to follow the sports news or whatever. It was a really, really big moment.
When did you have internet access, like at home? When was internet access almost as a broadband?
No, I remember my first trip onto the World Wide Web was 1994. So I was quite early, but hey, that was who I was at the time. I first got broadband, so proper, probably about 2001, 2002, around about that time, and it was desperately slow by today's standards.
Arron, when did you get internet access?
Well, I remember AOL and MSN was my first experience with internet access.
Those CDs and the floppy disks on the front of the magazines and kind of collecting them, and like 60 minutes here, 90 minutes there. Gosh, yes.
Yeah.
And the evolution is quite an interesting one. You said not the evolution of attacks, but the unfortunate is the cybersecurity industry stayed lockstep with the cyber threat actors. So in the early 2000s, probably going up until about 2008, malware wasn't really destructive. It had consequences, collateral damage, we'll call it. There was no crimeware for extortion or ransomware. They didn't exist. So we had a different problem. We had viruses that were wormable, that were just infecting the whole business within minutes of an infection. And they had the consequence of overloading systems and causing blue screens of death and things. So flip 2008, you've got big data comes in. We start to evolve past a single server. People are starting to get more clever in their e-commerce applications, B2B and B2C. Businesses sort of building all these platforms and data. So security evolves with it. Interestingly, there weren't many security operations product back then. So if you look for when SIMs were born, I think ArcSight was 2003, but it wasn't really mainstream until about 2007. I guess flip forward about 2013, that's when everybody started to adopt cloud. It was earlier, but Microsoft, Google, AWS weren't really offering cloud platforms and workloads and things. So again, there's a whole treasure trove with that. And then flip forward to where we are today, we've got agentic AI and all of them things that need security protections. So security has to stay lockstep and evolve with the threats, the actors, and more importantly, the things that you put to the internet that can actually have data problems and what actors are after.
And there's another kind of pivot moment in there as well, I think. And actually, Arron, it's appropriate that you're on the call, although I know this isn't the part of the business that you represent, but the bring your own device thing that started to happen in the early 2010s when people were able, and people were being encouraged. You've got a tablet, you've got a smartphone now, you've got your own laptops. IT can save a real packet if people bring their own devices into work, because that means they can also work from home as well. Of course, massive security implications around that too, Arron.
Yeah, and I'd probably add about things like IoT as well, to be honest. As Darren kind of described there, things have kind of gone from legacy firewalls and everything needs to be VPN'd. That still continues to a degree. With cloud providers recommending like micro segmentation in the cloud and things like that. But essentially, cybersecurity is moved with what I'd probably describe as society's drive to always be connected, right? we've said, we had AOL, we had MSN, and that was kind of like, instant messaging was the way we kind of got connected to each other and to the world and the internet when things kind of kicked off. But in reality, most of us now walk around with almost what was, the original PCs on our wrist, with a smartwatch. You see smart fridges, you see smart TVs, smart homes. Essentially cybersecurity's moved with all of those technologies, and it's something that, people need to keep up with, to the point where, before I worked with Google, I was working with a client, and we found that their enterprise organization was actually compromised with an entry point of an employee's smart fridge at home. So it's
Nice.
it's incredible, really, how cybersecurity is needing to move with everything that is being connected in modern society, to be honest.
And of course, there is the smartification of everything, IoT. There's the famous story of the fish tank in a casino in Las Vegas being an entry point to quite a big digital heist there. So you both make a really, really good point. I completely take that on board. Cyber defense has had to evolve to accommodate the evolution of cyber attacks, but also the internal moves as well, whether that is things like bring your own device, but also digital transformation. It's a journey that practically all organizations will have undergone to one extent or another over the last 10 or 15 years, I think. Evolution isn't always perfect, though. So, yes, while there is a lockstep between attack and defense, where do you think, Darren, we start to see the cracks appearing, the gaps growing between defense and attack?
So if I was to give it a one-liner, I see it as service fractures within the IT team. And I'll explain what I mean by that. Because you now have a complex digital platform, you've got cloud, data, AI, OT. We start to, if you take the consideration of the normal IT business, you have a person that looks after platforms and operating systems, full stop. You then have a separate team that look after apps and data that are installed on platforms. You have a separate team that are cloud team, and they look after the platforms and deployment of things. You have a separate security team. So by definition of the word separation, there is a different team. The problem is we don't look at the IT landscape as a full stack service. Somebody is always responsible for a different thing within the IT mix. It actually resonates quite well when you look at patch management. It's very easy for somebody to say, I do patch management of an operating system. Windows does the Patch Tuesday thing quite well, et cetera, et cetera. But you'll often hear from the IT team, well, that's where my job stops. The application team are in charge of the vulnerabilities of patch management. So we're describing these divides. And the problem is when these divides start to creep in, there's nobody who takes responsibility. And the best thing we have is almost what we call secured by design principles, or the UK are way behind the curves as far as I'm concerned on DevOps culture. But you also have a BISO, or a security person embedded in a project. But we are embedding a person for a short period of time with a short mindset and objective to complete a project, to sit and do a security by design audit, or build a perimeter, because we often build things in moats around our castles and our businesses instead of throughout the fabric of the digital IT infrastructure. This is where the complexity comes into it. Now, with that level of complexity also comes the level of knowledge that you need about systems. Should a person do this? Should a service account be allowed to do that? Should the DevOps code be able to manifest itself and perform the following objectives? And without having the integration layer, and the conversation's going to move into the word DevOps in a second, and it's definitely going to move into the word SecOps in a second. The problem is the legacy that I've described in the service fracture is really in a ClickOps infrastructure. You are installing things. You are making requests of packages to be delivered on your machine. The difference is the approval chains and everything within that all comes with a massive knowledge management overhead that is not well prescribed. So that I think leads to the biggest problem.
And I think there's an acknowledgement that, given that we're talking about the journey of enterprise technology in a way, and the attack of and defense of that, there's an acknowledgement that stuff has fundamentally changed. Whether it was, we've started with servers in a machine room that took 6 weeks to get racked up and have a network and have an operating system installed, to virtualized environments, and then to the cloud. And in terms of it being an endpoint of a server and an application, and having a bit of antivirus installed on an operating system, that world's completely blown up now. And yes, that still does exist. But when we start talking about microservices architecture and software as a service in the cloud, Arron, I guess, this is where Google comes into it an awful lot. The cloud has completely changed how we need to think about securing stuff. It's not just about installing a bit of antivirus on an endpoint these days.
Yeah, exactly. And, it links into Darren's point around, how things were legacy and how things were seen around like patch management and securing the OS. Like, as you say, with microservices and auto scaling, you could have a node, a pod, anything essentially spin up for a few minutes to a few days to a few weeks. How do you manage patches on something that's only available for a few minutes? I think what we end up finding is, maybe the endpoint doesn't really exist anymore as it used to be defined. With cloud functions, that they are just a bit of code essentially that runs. So what do you patch there besides making sure packages are up to date to make sure the functions are available that you need? There's a lot around, identity as an endpoint. There's a lot around browser as an endpoint from a user perspective. And, I think that's how things need to be looked at now. The traditional edge doesn't really exist anymore. Networks... Yeah, networks move with users. It moves with the device. So I think things need to be looked at as a perimeter isn't really there anymore, and it's the intricacies of how things actually connect to each other that we need to start exploring a lot more.
Darren, that word "edge" got you excited.
It did. So, a laptop is peripheral, a mobile phone is a peripheral, and when you look at them things, they are not on your crown jewels asset register as something that you look after. But somebody might say, I'm a developer or I'm a system administrator. As Arron said, that's the identity that's important, not the peripheral. And the server or the workload, that's the key workload, and your virtualist compute that's running something. It's the data that's important. And currently, a lot of security operations centers are actually looking at IP addresses and users. So great that they use a bit of identity in there, but they don't really know what the user does. So if an identity was impersonated, it's a problem. But then they're not in the code, and they certainly don't know about the data. So being able to make that seismic shift in what's important in the business is what's going to make the security operations center more successful in the future.
So this is where I think, and you mentioned it a moment ago, Darren, we shift left, as it were, to DevSecOps. And it's this principle of integrating functions such as security right into development and operations. It sounds sensible in theory, and I've heard from a lot of organizations that are on that journey in one way or another. In practice, however, based on your experiences, Darren, of working with customers and so on, how is it working on the ground?
On the ground, it starts, it's difficult. I think a lot of teams aren't there, and it starts with culture and really direction from the top to be able to bring in the integration of the various teams. As Arron mentioned earlier, things are getting more sophisticated when you look at cloud, data, AI, and OT. But to coin the shift left strategy and what Arron was talking about, he mentioned a point of what do you do when packages are out of date? You shift left and you go back to source. In shift left strategy, you have a build plan, which is called a recipe, which basically means that we're allowed to use these identities, we're allowed to use the package, and we're allowed to execute a code in a particular way. So what we're not doing is patching in line. What we're not doing is adding AV to the micro segmentation and the containers to actually run the code. When there's a problem of a process or a package that shouldn't be within that code, it uses a file integrity monitoring principle where it says, hold on a second, this is not in line with the code build. I'm going to build a brand new piece of workload, and I'm going to swap the workload over, and I'm going to turn the other one off and for investigation because it doesn't meet the needs of the original recipe of the code. So what that comes into is really where security comes to bear. So DevSecOps people are generally good at building applications and building code, and where security people need to be involved is more the governance layer. So the code is SAS test for source code to make sure that it's running properly. The packages are constantly supply chain managed. The code then goes through the build package then goes through, do I have the right privileges and the least privileges that I need to run the code? Yeah. Then you deploy the code, and then the code is then tested from a traditional vulnerability perspective. Then it's onboarded into an environment through your PaaS system, and then it's made live into the production environment with knowing the data, knowing who the platform owner and everything is on the way. And again, to bring it down to a really simple analogy, DevOps people operate what they build. And that's a very different culture to what we talked about 10 minutes ago, where we have this ClickOps culture of I only look after the operating system, the application person looks after the application. Yet that is owned by several different people, rather than the principle of DevOps is owned, but the system's owned by the people who build the code. So security operations need to be built into that type of culture, which is DevSecOps is what we know it as. But if environments are still in the legacy ClickOps structure, they need to adopt a similar sort of principle as DevSecOps to actually be more successful and more agile.
Arron, you were nodding furiously in agreement there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the key things is, traditionally, it's seen that security is slowing things down as well, right?
Yeah.
And as Darren just described, a lot of the workloads that a lot of cloud and DevOps teams are working with are ephemeral. So it's a case of, well, we'll spin it up, and if it doesn't work, we'll blow it away and we'll spin it up again. Well, when if you're looking at how to integrate security into that, well, you spin it up, it works, but it doesn't meet security posture, so then we have to blow it away again. So I think if we take the opposite approach of, let's say SecDevOps almost, where, DevOps and traditional IT need to make a more security-focused approach. Well, if security starts to make a more development-based approach as well, look at automation and how they can embed themselves in the existing pipelines, everyone kind of gets the best of both worlds. Security is then seen as being agile because it's part of the delivery pipeline and the CI/CD processes and, some of the things that Darren's just described. And developers and cloud engineers and traditional IT engineers don't need to, worry about having to audit everything every few months, because they know that everything's as was referenced, secure by design. It's secure from the very start of the process. So, in theory, security can remove a lot of overhead down the line by embedding everything into the same development frameworks that people are already using.
And being baked into those recipes, and the origin of all the ingredients in those recipes. Is this where things like infrastructure as code and so on come in, and making sure that the security is part of that base level build code whenever you roll it out? So you don't necessarily need to go through all of the same assurance pieces when you are going through deployment.
Yeah, I think, design patterns, it's making sure that things are templated and governed from a build perspective. So, let's stop things insecure being deployed in the first place. Let's flag things before it goes into even development or pre-prod areas. Let's make sure that, security can be as automated and development friendly as possible. It's patterns, it's templates, it's procedures, and it's about things being agile at both sides.
And the agile is really important, because the iteration, you could put a version 1 of an application live, a week later, it could have a security finding that nobody knew about, because these things do happen. Yeah. There's a problem with the package, but because you're so agile, you're able to deliver version 2.0 as soon as you know the problem. In traditional infrastructure, unless they're using an agile and an automation or orchestration approach, they're not going to be able to achieve the same outcomes.
And Darren, something that Arron touched on there was frameworks. How do you look at where frameworks like, I don't know, NIST, ISO 27001, even Cyber Essentials, I guess right as a starting point for some smaller organizations, how are these frameworks, how do they plug into the whole shift left and DevSecOps thing? What opportunities are there to help these frameworks deliver the most value for organizations and be more than just that tick box exercise or little badge on the bottom of your website?
Well, it's interesting. So we'll start with Cyber Essentials quite rightly, because that's what most small business organizations try and achieve. Yeah. Cyber Essentials looks at what we're describing through vulnerability management. They actually don't have any framework elements towards DevSecOps or how you should security monitor or any of them principles. 27001 version 2022 does. It has things around risk assessments for types of code, package release management, sharing code to the internet. But NIST becomes an interesting one, and probably more predominant from a security operations perspective or a CISO strategy perspective. So often, if you look at the NIST framework, is govern, identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, and the SOC sit in the detect and respond function typically. So we are seeing customers who are tendering for MSSP services who are very specifically asking us to just do the detect and respond elements of it. But we are not shifting left into the lessons learned, or even higher in the identify the vulnerability or the weakness in the networking, or higher still in the governance to allow us to input into the development teams or the infrastructure teams so we can give them better design patterns. We are seeing that shift in enterprise, where unfortunately, due to skills gaps within the cybersecurity market, security operations staff, security engineers, security analysts are constantly being asked to do more than just the respond to an alert and triage the alert and call an incident or inform a customer of a problem. There's a lot more that needs to be baked in, and there's a lot more mileage that needs to do, which is part of the education really around DevSecOps being needed, and frameworks like 27001 or Cyber Essentials being updated.
Sure, and you mentioned there about challenges with regards to workforce and so on. In many ways, we are seeing innovative tools. We're seeing AI, generative AI, and so on be deployed in lots and lots of ways in organizations to try and help support a workforce to do their job better or smarter, more efficient, whatever. Arron, are there any ways in which you are seeing AI support those staff who are sitting in the SOC?
Yeah, absolutely. I think nothing's a security product these days, or a product in its own right without AI, right?
Yes.
It's everywhere, and I think we're starting to move away from AI being a gimmick and just something that's there as an add-on to something that is truly useful. There are functions like user entity behavior analytics, as an example, that are embedded in a lot of security platforms now, which essentially uses things like machine learning to correlate what would be normal behavior for a user. That anomaly detection massively reduces the amount of time it would normally take a SOC analyst to detect some kind of behavior. It's doing those risk ratings, it's doing that pattern detection for you, so an analyst isn't having to spend hours going through a multitude of logs and baselining different things themselves. Generative AI, as you said, is also playing a big part, where it can help create detections for analysts, it can help create remediative playbooks. But ultimately, I think it helps bridge a skill gap in the industry as well. we're finding, if you look at, any sort of job market, especially around security, there are a lot of entry-level roles that are available, a lot of entry-level candidates that are, applying for a lot of roles, and there isn't a great deal of senior roles that are available anymore when you start to look at SOC analysts. We're starting to see a blend of what a traditional tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 structure would be, where those definitive roles and functions don't really exist anymore. I think AI is a really good enabler for things like that, because it allows what would traditionally be seen as a level 1 analyst to start bridging into maybe tier 2 and tier 3. And it allows a lot of those functions to maybe just be automated and, allow a lot more diverse skill set to be available in a SOC.
Darren, any other thoughts on how we're seeing the SOC analyst roles changing in this world, particularly when you start applying DevSecOps and when you start applying some more, I guess, cutting-edge tools, maybe AI-enabled tools and processes?
So the AI-enabled tools, as Arron alluded to, is going to help us with the commodity and volume-based stuff. It will allow the analysts to be able to upskill and work on some of the evolving technologies. So whilst we are seeing these technologies coming in to enable the junior level 1 roles, entry level roles, we are seeing movements in cyber strategy where CNAPP solutions, cloud native application posture, DSPM tools, data security posture management, ISPM tools, and all of these tools are basically a next generation SIEM system to allow you to do posture, vulnerability, package management, supply chain management, data management, identity management in a completely different way. And it allows the analyst to shift left on the stack. Of course, we still need people to do the level 1, level 2 role, as Arron alluded to, but I think the AI will just help them along the way. It'll reduce the workload on that team to allow us to better skill them and evolve security operations effectively.
Before we move on to the final part of the show, gents, any other business, any kind of final parts as we start to sweep up making DevSecOps really work to its full potential? Anything we haven't spoken about?
My key takeaways are we need to learn to change the culture. We need to learn to change the team. We shouldn't be frightened of change. I think it's driven from the top. If we're segregating all of business units to perform a holistic IT function, I think a CIO and a CISO need to learn to actually coexist and work in a much better way. And I think teams need to be more integrated, and it allows the business to be more efficient and allows you to do more with less.
Doing more with less. Arron, anything to add?
Yeah, I think, we've kind of, as we've gone through today, we've described how, we had traditional, maybe Linux engineers, Windows engineers, and then that's kind of, developed into DevOps engineers, and you can kind of see through the history of everything that things have become more and more specialized, which has just compounded how disjointed, things have been between teams. I think it's very clear that everyone has a responsibility to be secure. It's not just on a security team. And as Darren rightly said, I think that's a bit of a culture shift, right? It allows everyone to shift left, if you will. And I'd just really encourage, as I've already mentioned, security teams to be more development friendly and to use development methodologies. Helps speed things up. It helps blend those teams together, and helps remove that historic mindset of security gets in the way.
And if anybody tuning in today wants to find out more about what we've been talking about, where's the best place to reach out, Darren?
We have a LinkedIn page for Acora. That's the best place, or our website. We publish expert articles and put links for various things like podcasts and things up to allow the community to get involved.
And same question to you, Arron. I mean, the glib and it's a response that's below me, but I'm going to say it anywhere. We could just Google something, but I'm guessing you might have a more specific call to action than that.
Yeah, no, I love it. Just Google us, Yeah. So I'm normally most reachable on LinkedIn, to be honest.
Okay.
So, and anyone listening is free to send me a connection request or a message. Alternatively, there are numerous different ways that you can get in touch with different people at Google, if anything piques your interest. So, feel free to reach out to me, and I'll happily, broker any conversations and defer to anyone that specializes in a certain topic if needed.
Super stuff. Love the open door policy. We'll also include a link to that in the show notes and description for this episode. Finally, we have some quick fire questions that we ask all of our guests on CXO Secrets. We haven't done this with two guests on the show before, and just to keep things streamlined, Arron, if it's all right, I'll pop these questions to you, Darren. Darren, what's your secret? Put your modesty to one side for a moment. What would you say, or perhaps what would others say is your key attribute or key learning that's helped you to get to where you are?
Always keep learning. If you don't necessarily need to remember everything, that's what Google's for. Haha, that's another pun. Have good mentors, and also keep a good keen eye on good presentation content delivered by your peers. It's always important to deliver a good presentation to the audience.
Very good. We do a Pass the Question where you get to put a question to a future guest on the show, whoever they may be. First, though, we have a question for you from a former guest, Dak Leonarachi, who is EVP and CTO at US energy company NRG Energy, had this question.
We talked about AI and Gen AI. Now, there's a tremendous amount of excitement from the business of what it can do, or the potential. And what I'd love to understand from your next guest is how you set expectations within the business as to what you can deliver and when, and the value that it can bring.
So I would have two approaches towards this. If you're looking at it as a generalist approach of how it can be useful for the workforce, what I would look to do is build a persona-based usability. So how would a CIO use AI Copilot or ChatGPT? How would somebody in HR use it? And it doesn't matter what the field is and what the team is, but it's about giving them insights into how that AI can augment them. And we are definitely seeing, just in the use of ChatGPT, Copilot, and other services, really adding a force multiplier to people's jobs. Then the second approach is, if you are building an AI strategy, don't let your strategy be you have an AI strategy. Actually do something more useful, I think, is the question. It's about either improving the revenue of the business through data cubes and various other things, make it so you understand how your business is running and getting data insights and how it's operating. Or I would say you have to make it have some sort of metric where it is able to save money on the bottom line. So how can AI be a force multiplier in your business? So either improving people's jobs, even removing jobs and transforming to other things, as we've said in the skills shortage throughout this podcast, putting people to better use, doing more with less.
Other AI models are available. It would be remiss of me not to mention Gemini, given that we have Google here on the show as well, Arron. Finally, Darren, do you have a question you'd like me to put to a future guest on the show, whoever they may be?
We've talked a lot about culture on this podcast. I think my question was, what are some of the biggest innovation and how it's enabled culture within your business to succeed?
Great question. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you both for joining us on the show. A reminder that we'll include links to what we've been speaking about today in the show notes and description for this episode. But for now, Darren, Arron, thank you very much. And for now, from all of us here, bye-bye from me too.